The Royal Navy had indeed finally arrived, just as his mother had said it would. The people on his lifeboat started to sing. As the hurricane got closer, the crew was shocked at the sound of the few survivors actually singing. The middle of the boat was a small, round-faced boy in a bright red life jacket, sitting straight and tall, shivering. The destroyer moved alongside Colin's lifeboat. The crew lowered a rope and told him to grab on, but Colin couldn't move. Not Not only were his hands too soft to hold on anything, but he literally couldn't move. His life jacket had been holding him in one position for so long he felt like a statue. It was only then that he realized he hadn't moved at all in hours. He'd been like a human-shaped pillar of stone going up and down the waves, the Colin statue sitting in the lifeboat. He knew what he was supposed to do. He knew he was supposed to climb up the rope, get into the destroyer, but it was physically impossible. Gorman and his boat pulled alongside and asked the crew on the deck to throw down another rope. Then Gorman and another sailor made a kind of harness for Colin, tying a rope under his armpits. Colin couldn't help at all, so they slowly and gingerly, very carefully, to do no harm, lifted him up. On the Hurricane, the crew hurried Colin into the engine room. They were scared he would die. He could have. But slowly the warmth from the engine started to thaw him out. Some sailors helped him take off his scarlet red life jacket, now sopping wet and encrusted with sea salt. He took off his dirty, oily clothes. The sailors wrapped him in a towel and gave him something warm to drink. Looking back years later, Colin was amazed to realize how young the sailors were. Some of the Hurricane crew were only 18 years old, only 7 years older than he was. Al Gorman was 27. The captain of the Hurricane, who was considered to be the old man of the ship, had turned 34 5 days earlier. Now all Colin could think about was getting warmer and clean. He really wanted to shower. He was covered with oil from the Benares. His lifeboat had been so close to the sinking ship that he had oil in his hair and in his mouth and under his nails. It bothered him terribly. But first, the ship's doctor, Peter Collinson, wanted to examine him to make sure he didn't have any wounds or need immediate medical attention. He didn't. He just needed to get warm and eventually have some food and water. Colin really wanted a shower. Finally, he got one, and he felt much better after washing away all the dirt and oil and salt. So there they are, pulling him up onto the boat, pulling Colin up. He had lived through a horrific night and day, through things no 11-year-old should have to. Colin Ryder Richardson, who just a day before had been a happy boy on an adventure, playing ghosts, sailing deck chairs, had lived through and would be forever changed. But at least he, unlike so many others, was alive. As the hurricane continued to look for survivors, most of those already on board fell asleep. Colin did just as Sonia and Derek Beach had. Bess slept too. But Bess was having trouble, worried about her brother Lewis. Margaret Betch could not sleep either. She needed to know what had happened to Barbara, so she stayed awake and helped the crew. As each boat arrived with survivors, she took the few children in her arms, rubbed their limbs, and sometimes even smacked their faces to revive them. With each boat, she and the crew heard different parts of the story. How many children had died, how many escorts, how many adult passengers. One teenager who survived was Tony Quinton. He would later serve in Parliament. His mother survived too. In a full lifeboat, they were 2 of only 8 who lived. So many people lost family. Pat Bulmer on Colin's lifeboat had lost her mother. Monika Linne, daughter of the famous German writer Thomas Mann, had been on the Benares. Her father was living in exile in America, speaking out against Hitler. Monica and her husband Gino were on their way to America. Monica and Gino had gotten into lifeboats together, but the boat was damaged during launch, and Gino Laney was thrown overboard and died. Monica survived. As Margaret greeted each boat, it became clear what a tragedy this had been, and with each boat she asked, "Is there a girl named Barbara on board?" Boat after boat, there was no Barbara, and there were many more adult survivors and children. On the Hurricane sailed through all the boxes on the search grid, the crew desperate to find more survivors.